On the topic of, I guess, the ratings for a condition like MS that has such highly variable symptoms, what is the VA looking at there?
It's all about symptoms. They are looking at which symptoms of MS do you have. And you can have all kinds of things. There can be vision problems, speech problems, mobility issues, cognitive impairment. There may be secondary mental health issues. There are so many different possible iterations in MS that I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer. But what VA will try to do is to look at the veteran's particular symptoms. They'll give them the baseline 30% rating. Then they'll look at the symptoms and see if there seem to be symptoms that are not considered in that 30% rating and need to be rated separately. And if so, they will, in fact, rate them separately.
And so I know several of the other neurological conditions mentioned can have good days and bad days. So for a veteran who's claiming a neurological condition, if they get scheduled for a CMP exam and they go in and it's a good day, the symptoms, the flare-ups are not present, how can they communicate to the CMP examiner what a bad day is like and ensure that they get a rating that reflects the severity of their symptoms?
Well, sadly, there's nothing they can do that will ensure that they get a rating that's comparable to their symptoms. But what they can do is a couple of things. They can, number one, take medical records that show the variety of symptoms that they have.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA. If you're a veteran struggling with the VA's disability system or just want to make sure you're getting the benefits you've earned, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update that could change your life. I'm Christian Terrison, here with renowned veterans disability attorney Francis Jackson from Jackson and MacNichol. Jack has dedicated his career to helping veterans like you win the benefits you deserve, recovering millions of dollars for thousands of heroes. This podcast isn't just for veterans navigating the system, though. It's for their families, their friends, and anyone else who wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who've served. So stick around because we're here to make sure you get the support you need. Now, today's episode is on neurological disorders, all too common in the veteran population, sadly. But what kinds of neurological disorders do you most often see veterans filing claims for?
Oh, I think the one I'm seeing most commonly now is Parkinson's.
Okay. And how do neurological disorder claims differ from mental health or physical claims that we typically see?
Well, neurological disorders are more complex, so I think it's often harder to prove how those are related to service. They are relatively similar in process to other physical claims, but I think that's probably the biggest distinction.
Okay. So how do the VA's rating criteria attempt to capture the daily struggles of a lot of these disorders?
Well, the VA does neurological ratings a couple of different ways. Some of them have specific ratings. Some of them are rated by analogy, but the underlying theory for all of them is that the VA looks at the symptoms that the person is suffering and tries to match the symptoms to the rating criteria, or the rating criteria to the symptoms, depending on how you want to look at it, as closely as they can. So,
before you get too far into it, I just wanted to clarify what an analogous rating is for our viewers.
An analogous rating, say for example that you have a condition that doesn't have a specific listed rating in the VA's rating diagnostic codes. So when that happens, what the VA does is they try to figure out, okay, what is this closest to? And so if they think it's close to something else, then they will use the listing that they think it most closely resembles as the basis for rating. So for example, if you have sciatica in the long nerve running down your legs, there isn't a specific rating criteria for sciatica per se, but there is a rating for paralysis of the nerves. So they will rate the sciatica by analogy to the paralysis of the nerves.
Okay. And I know we've had some cases where what rating is chosen in that analogous rating process can impact how the symptoms are captured. If they choose an analogous rating that gets 80% of the symptoms of the diagnosis, that's still leaving 20% of the problems a veteran might be dealing with day in and day out.
That's right. And MS, for example, is a good example of that. So if you are found to have service-connected MS, then you automatically get a 30% rating. But the court recently held that you don't just necessarily get the 30% rating. In addition, the VA has to look to see if there are additional symptoms that stem from the MS that are not considered in the diagnostic code, and if so, they have to consider and rate those additional symptoms separately. As a result, even though there's a kind of standard 30% rating for MS, you can actually get a rating up to 100% depending on the nature and extent of the symptoms.
Okay. And what are the most common service connection pathways, if you will, for neurological disorders? I know some are congenital, but
Well,
how does that play out in a disability claim?
truly congenital conditions can't be service-connected. What can be done is if they're aggravated by service, then you can be rated for the aggravation. But the VA recognizes a ton of different neurological conditions. There's multiple sclerosis, there's ALS, there's Parkinson's, there's peripheral neuropathy, there's radiculopathy. There are things like epilepsy and functional seizures. There's traumatic brain injury. There's the headaches, migraines and tension headaches. There are spinal cord injuries. There are just, you can even have narcolepsy, for example. There are tons of different conditions. So all of them you kind of get there a little bit differently depending on what's going on. But there are two that you have to pay special attention to. ALS, the infamous Lou Gehrig syndrome, that is automatically service-connected and it will be 100% just because of the nature of the disease. It's a horrible condition. It's it's presumptively service-connected. And there is a special 7-year presumption for MS, so that gets treated separately. There is now a presumption of service connection for Parkinson's for those who served in Vietnam and were exposed to Agent Orange. So it just depends on what you're talking about. Now, with a more classic, diabetes with accompanying peripheral neuropathy, the diabetes is presumptive, so the secondary condition of peripheral neuropathy can be attributed to that. If you have a traumatic brain injury that causes neurological symptoms, again, that is not presumptive, but it gets treated a little differently just because it's the way it manifests itself. It gets its own diagnostic code and very specific methodology for ratings.
On the topic of, the ratings for a condition like MS that has such highly variable symptoms, what is the VA looking at there?
It's all about symptoms. They are looking at which symptoms of MS do you have. And you can have all kinds of things. There can be vision problems, speech problems, mobility issues, cognitive impairment. There can be secondary mental health issues. There are so many different possible iterations in MS that I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer. But what VA will try to do is to look at the veteran's particular symptoms They'll give them the baseline 30% rating. Then they'll look at the symptoms and see if there seem to be symptoms that are not considered in that 30% rating and need to be rated separately. And if so, they will, in fact, rate them separately.
And so I know several of the other neurological conditions mentioned can have good days and bad days. So for a veteran who's claiming a neurological condition, if they get scheduled for a CMP exam and they go in and it's a good day, the symptoms, the flare-ups are not present, how can they communicate to the CMP examiner what a bad day is like and ensure that they get a rating that reflects the severity of their symptoms?
Well, sadly, there's nothing they can do that will ensure that they get a rating that's comparable to their symptoms. But what they can do is a couple of things. They can, number one, take medical records that show the variety of symptoms that they have. So it's important for them to be talking to their doctor at every visit about what the current symptoms are, what have they been since the last visit, what are they like now, which ones have gotten more serious. It's important to keep a record of the kind of symptoms that they experience. A daily log is best, but even a calendar with entries about the more severe symptoms will help. And it never hurts to bring another person who preferably lives in the same household and sees day-to-day functioning. A lot of times the examiner won't talk to someone that you bring with you to an exam. But my personal belief is that if you bring someone to the exam with you and you say to the doctor, these are the symptoms I have, and my wife, my son, my father, my cousin, whoever it is you brought with you, my friend who lives next door, can tell you about all the times he or she has seen these various symptoms, I think that makes you more credible. I can't prove that, but I am convinced that that is true.
When it comes to the medical evidence, how important are diagnostic tests? I'm thinking of MRIs, EEGs, nerve conduction studies, things like that. How important are they in establishing severity?
It's like everything else, it depends. But the problem is that with a lot of these neurological conditions, there really aren't definitive tests. Migraines, what's the test for migraines? There isn't one, And with MS, really the best you can hope for is an MRI showing demyelination in the white matter in the brain.
Right.
That's not definitive. It can be other things besides MS, and it can be MS without having the demyelination. But, if it's MS and you have the MRI, so much the better. And it's the same with all the things you've talked about. Whether you're talking about peripheral neuropathy and nerve conduction studies or what you're talking about. The more evidence you can amass to support the nature and severity of the condition, the easier it is for someone at the VA to accept it. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So all of these things, depending on the condition you're talking about, will help or potentially help, any that bear on that particular condition.
Well, and I know with several complex neurological disorders, the diagnostic process is a rule-out process. So, if you have a test showing that there is not a problem and that rules out
some other condition
Yep. that might not be service connected,
Yep.
and that can help in its own way to show that your symptoms are coming from the condition that the service connected condition.
That's all true. I can't say too strongly, the more medical evidence that you can provide to the VA that supports your condition, the better. I was just working with a lady who lives here in the state, and she had, she was a former officer and very smart, and had done a lot of research that she put together about some exposure issues. It was really very well done, and she submitted it to the VA, and they just went ahead and granted her. They didn't hesitate at all. And so I think the more you can put together a compelling combination of medical information and factual information that supports your claim, whether it's a neurological claim or any other kind of claim, the better you'll do.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is just because of the cases I'd worked on, but it seems to me that a lot of the neurologists, the specialists, when I've reached out to them on behalf of a client, one, they're shocked that the VA would make a denial in a case. To them, as a medical practitioner, everything is very clear cut, and they're amazed that the VA didn't reach the same conclusions that they have. And then two, I'll ask oftentimes for a nexus opinion saying, these symptoms or this disorder either began in service, was exacerbated, symptoms were exacerbated by service. And they'll say, oh, no, I couldn't write a letter that says this was caused by that. And I'll stop and I'll say, that's not the letter we need. We just need a letter saying it's a true 50-50. You can't say whether it was events in service or some other factor that led to the neurological disorder. And, they'll say, really, that's it? You just need me to say it's a total 50-50 and medically unknowable? And I'll say, yeah, can you put that in a letter? And they'll say, oh, I'll put that in a letter anytime.
Yeah, and it's because most doctors, and for that matter, most veterans, don't really understand the standard of proof in the VA. It is as likely as not, 50-50. As one judge on the court early on said, remember, it's like baseball. The tie goes to the runner.
Yeah. I had one neurologist who, after we got off the phone, he said he was going to write letters for a few of his veteran clients now that he understood the system and the standard, because he'd been hesitant before. He didn't want to be the one on the hook to say, oh yes, this thing that happened in 1975 definitely led to neurological symptoms in 1988. But when you say, is it at least a 50-50, then that changed his whole outlook.
Yeah, we have one case where the VA was denying a claim for lung cancer because they said, guy was a smoker. It's obviously from his smoking. And we consulted an expert, and he wrote this nice report and explained that this gentleman had been on submarines, which in that era, when he served, were heavily insulated with asbestos. And he said the asbestos exposure in and of itself could have caused the lung cancer. The smoking in and of itself could have caused the lung cancer. And there was no way to know which one caused the lung cancer. It was 50-50. And the VA ultimately had to grant the case, although they certainly kicked and screamed long enough, but they finally granted it.
Well, and on that note, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for watching this episode of Victory Over VA. Please be sure to like and subscribe and join us again next week.
We hope we'll be able to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.